Hello, welcome to the Prime Podcast. I'm here to talk for the week in consumer electronics and technology news. This is our 9th episode, and this week we have a lot of news to cover, including the Apple versus Samsung patent lawsuit. I have a couple articles on that. I also have an article on the Nexus 7, another quite long article on all the Windows 8 tablets and Ultrabooks that were launched at IFA 2012, which will be the focus of this week. I also talk with the Amazon Kindle Fire next generation model. And then I'll wrap it up with the Apple versus Samsung patent lawsuit again. So let's go and get started with that patent lawsuit. This is kind of Google's response to the lawsuit. So the real summary of the Apple versus Samsung patent lawsuit is that Google wins. No, it is Apple wins. Yeah, I got that confused. But Apple won the lawsuit, and Samsung owes Apple $1 billion, just a little bit over $1 billion, in damages for infringing Apple's many patents. And that kind of makes sense. Samsung did copy a lot of the ideas and use them on their own phones. But honestly, I'll talk about that a little bit later. And I don't really think that that's a big of a deal for Samsung. $1 billion for you and me might be huge. But for Samsung, they make tons of money each and every day. And $1 billion isn't a big thing. Especially since if they wanted to, they could have just paid Apple that much money up front, and that's kind of what they could have done, but they didn't. They just released their products, and that's how they did it. But Google responded to this lawsuit, and they essentially said that Google stock Android doesn't really apply to most of these claims that Apple is talking about. So before we talk about what Google is saying, let's talk about what is stock Android. Many companies like Samsung and HTC put their own skins on top of their Android operating system in order to make their own phones more their own. So, for example, the HTC, they have their HTC clock, and Samsung, they have TouchWiz, which is kind of an interesting skin where they have like the icons at the bottom and then the grid. It used to look a lot like iOS back when it first launched on like the Galaxy S, but since it's changed and has turned into more of Samsung's own sort of thing. Although one of those patents that was infringed was a design patent for the icon design of like I don't remember what it was, maybe the phone icon. A lot of things like that Apple sued Samsung for, but those are just basic things. But pure Android is just Android, and if you've seen a Nexus device like the Nexus 7 or Galaxy Nexus, then you'll be familiar with what I'm talking about. Essentially, it's just Android, plain Android, what Google releases, and that's it. Because normally Google releases an operating system, and a company like Samsung adds things to it in order to make it their own. Google just releases the software, and that's it. Overall, it's a good software, and that's just how it is. But now I'm going to read Google's official response. The Court of Appeals will review both infringement and the validity of patent claims. Most of these don't relate to the core Android operating system, and several are being re-examined by the U.S. Patent Office. The mobile industry is moving fast, and all players, including newcomers, are building upon ideas that have been around for decades. We want to work with partners to give consumers innovative and affordable products, and we don't want anything to limit that. And I really think, I really like what Google's saying right here, that newcomers, like anybody who, like Microsoft, everybody who makes a smartphone, kind of has to have similar ideas to what Apple's doing, because that's just kind of what the modern smartphone is. It's like if you, for example, if old phones where you have the rotating dial, now they have the number pad. Think about it like that. Nobody really wanted to have the rolling dial after the number pad was introduced. I don't really know if there was a patent for the number pad, but I think everybody kind of adopted that within their phones. And that's just how they did it. Same thing with like computers. Somebody made the desktop design for a computer. Somebody created the GUI, and people just kind of moved on from there and did what they wanted to do with it. And overall, it kind of has the same base, but it is different in many ways. So is Android really different from iOS? And if you go into a Verizon to look at the iPhone 4S and Galaxy Nexus, you can obviously tell the difference. Pure iOS and pure Android are extremely different. That's what Google's trying to say here. Yeah, they both share certain smartphone features like a web browser, a little icon, like the phone icon, and a few buttons and applications like an app store. They're very, very different. They're more different than they are similar. Google was the first introducing, say, the notification bar. Google Now is completely revolutionary. There are folders, there's multitasking that were first introduced in Android. And a lot of these things just came back, and actually now, Samsung, they make a ton of phones, and they've made some of the first 4G LTE phones on Verizon's network. I heard someone, I think it was Boise report, that apparently Samsung will sue Apple if Apple has LTE built into the next iPhone, because Samsung kind of says they own LTE or something like that. But I find that kind of interesting. But essentially, pure Android really isn't even very similar at all to pure iOS. I think that's kind of what Google's saying here. Of course, in the future, we could have a Google versus Apple lawsuit to really know who would win. But I'm guessing that it could be like a draw. Google could win, Apple could win. There are certain features that each copy from each other. But Samsung had a similar sort of case, but Samsung did copy a little bit more than what Google did with Android. So moving on to our first sponsor, that's Media Temple. We use Media Temple to host your website at theprimer.co, and you might have a website of your own, and maybe you want to go ahead and set up a website and find good web hosting. And Media Temple is one of those good web hosting companies they can go for. They do cost more than the average web hosting company. $20 per month, that's the minimum grid service fee, and that's like 4 times the amount that GoDaddy charges. But GoDaddy is very slow, Media Temple is very fast, and GoDaddy has bad support. Media Temple has good support. There's just a whole lot of benefits with Media Temple. And if you sign up now to Media Temple using the link I have in the description below, you can actually get a $25 credit applied to your account. And that means if you have the grid service for $20 a month, you pay 1 month, you'll get a month and $5 extra free. So that's a pretty good deal right there. Media Temple is a good web hosting company. I've used them for years, and I haven't had any real issues with them. So kind of check that out using the link that I have in the description below. Moving on to Google, and a very interesting topic relating to advertising. So each and every day, millions of people go to the world's most popular website, and that's Google. Google tries to make their website as simple as possible, allowing users to load up the website fast, find what they're looking for, and just move on. That's kind of what Google does. They have just a Google logo, a search bar, and a couple of buttons. That's what they focus on. But in more recent years, Google's actually started to add very simple, subtle advertisements to their homepage. They've advertised many things over the years, like the Google Nexus 1, Google Nexus S, Motorola Droid, HTC G1, and Google Chrome. Certain products like Google Chrome are very, very popular today because Google advertises Google Chrome every time you go to Google or web browser that isn't Chrome, you'll get an advertisement suggesting that says basically install Google Chrome for free or something like that. And that gets a lot of people just install Chrome. It's free, it's easy to do, and really anybody can do it, so why not? So that's just how it works. Google, many people go to Google and they see the Chrome advertisement and they go ahead and install Chrome because they don't have anything to risk. Other advertisements, for example, the Nexus 1 or G1, that's another one of the phones, but both of those phones really weren't bad phones, or they just didn't succeed like other phones like the Motorola Droid did. Even though they were all advertised on Google's homepage, they just didn't really succeed. And I don't really know why exactly that is. It could be, for example, that you had to buy the phone for $200 and then pay like $20 a month or whatever it was back then to the carrier for 2 years after that in order to get the phone. And I don't think many people really want to upgrade their phone, or I think it's just more complicated to do that than install a web browser. But starting today, or actually this article is from Tuesday, August 28th, but starting then, Google added an advertisement to their homepage which shows off the Google Nexus 7. It says, essentially, there's some text that says, the playground is open, the new $199 tablet from Google. After that, there's a little image that shows the top part of the Nexus 7 tablet. And right now we can't really tell if this is going to be successful or not, just simply because it's kind of a mix between one of those phones and a web browser. It's cheap at $200, but again, you don't have to have a contract with this. You can just buy it and you'll have it. But it also is $200, and you have to have it shipped to you. You have to enter in your credit card and all things like that, which you don't have to do when you install web browsers. So I think it could be a mixed sort of thing. But I think honestly, this is more of an advertisement that's targeted for people looking for the first tablet or a new tablet. For example, someone might have the first generation iPad, the first Motorola Zoom tablet. They bought it a couple of years ago. They're looking for a new tablet, and they could either get a new iPad or Motorola Zoom 2, or they could get a Nexus 7 for half the price at $200. So I don't know. I think that's kind of what Google's targeting people who are looking for a tablet or already have a tablet, since it's kind of not an average. It's not something that somebody's just going to buy at impulse. I don't think it's like that. At least not for the average person. Maybe for a geek who really wants a tablet, says it's $200. That's a good deal. Let's just get it. People like that might get it, but I don't think like a grandparent or a dad or someone like that would just buy this tablet just because it's a tablet. I mean, they kind of have to have a reason to get it, and you're looking for a tablet, and they see this good price on Google, and they just click and buy it. That's one thing that could happen. So let's go ahead and move on to the biggest article of the week and potentially the month and even quarter of the year. IFA 2012 is an event that is happening right now in Berlin, Germany, and it's essentially an event kind of like CES but in Germany, where all kinds of mobile devices and gadgets in general are announced. There are a bunch of cameras, computers, smartphones, some keyboards, computer accessories. Pretty much anything you can think of after everything the technology was announced. Yesterday, Wednesday, August 29th, I actually wrote an article, quite a long article actually. I updated this morning too, and it's just over 3,000 words long, and it's not quite done yet because some more computers will be announced later this week as IFA 2012 goes on. But right now, there are a total of 18 new Ultrabooks / tablets running Windows 8 that were announced at this event in Berlin, Germany. And I'm going to very, very quickly and very, very briefly go over all of them. I can't really talk about every single thing in very detail because that would take quite a long time because each kind of section is like 200 words long and it's kind of long. But this will give you a good idea of what is out there. You can go and click on the article description below if you want more information on each of them, because I have it well laid out. I have all the companies listed in alphabetical order from Acer to Toshiba, I think. That's the bottom one. Toshiba's at the very bottom. And then within each section, I have like 8 Asus, for example. I have a Vivo Tab and the Vivo Tab RT. I have all the different models listed out too, some specifications, and a couple paragraphs for each of them. So kind of you can go there, check all the information. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with Acer. They're the first one on the list because they are alphabetically the first. And when you think of computers, you probably don't think of Acer. They do make computers, but they don't really make great computers, unless they haven't in the past. Acer, they just aren't the best company out there. But that's sort of slowly changed over the past few years. And it's actually kind of continuing with this new device at Acer now. It's called the Acer Aspire S7. And in my opinion, it's one of the better Ultrabook tablet hybrids that we've seen so far at this event in Berlin. It combines the slim design you find with the Windows 8 tablet with great hardware and features that you find with the Windows 8 notebook. It will launch at an unknown date, probably a price of around $1,000, probably up from there, because it's kind of a high-end device. Core i5 or Core i7 processor, 11.6-inch, 1080p display, USB 3, 9 hours of battery life, Windows 8. Next up is Asus. Asus is a big company. They've made many tablets like the Transformer series. They've made many computers, many Ultrabooks. They know what they're doing, and they're launching 2 Windows 8 devices, the Vivo Tab and the Vivo Tab RT. As the name suggests, the Vivo Tab is more of a full-blown Windows 8 device. It runs Windows 8. It's an Intel Atom processor, 2 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage, an 11.6-inch IPS display, 1366 by 768 resolution, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC. It will also have a dock which you can attach to it. The model without a dock will most likely be cheaper, while the model with the dock will probably cost a little bit more. I'm expecting it will be around $500 to $650 and will launch this fall. The Vivo Tab RT, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It is essentially a Windows RT tablet. You know, the Microsoft Surface RT, that's basically this tablet, and it runs Windows RT. It doesn't have the Windows desktop, which has the new Metro UI. This thing will be powered by an NVIDIA Tegra 3 processor. It will support 2 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of storage, the same display at the same resolution. It'll also have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and NFC. Even though Asus hasn't announced the details on the pricing or availability of the Vivo Tab RT, we can expect that it'll probably cost around $350 to $550 and it'll launch this fall. Let's go ahead and move on to Dell, because they're kind of an interesting company. They have tried in the past to make tablets and smartphones like the Dell Venue Pro, Android phones like the Dell Streak, and tablets like the Dell Inspiron Duo. But for most of the part, all these devices that Dell has tried to make have really failed. Like, not really slightly failed, but really, really failed. Like the Dell Venue Pro, they had a bunch of production issues after it launched late. The Dell Streak kind of failed because it was kind of a bad form factor. Ran an outdated version of Android. This was kind of a weird device. The Inspiron Duo was a good device, but it was essentially a really, really expensive netbook that launched in a time when netbooks were starting to fade away. Dell really could potentially reclaim their spot in the sort of tablet market by these 3 devices that Dell announced. The first one is the XPS 10, second is the Duo 12, third one's the 127. So let's go and start with the XPS 10, which is going to be Dell's actual tablet. It'll be powered by an ARM processor, have a 10-inch display, support micro USB and micro SD, 20 hours of battery life, and it'll run Windows RT. We can expect the Dell XPS 10 will arrive at a lower price point and will arrive in October. Next up is the Duo 12, which is more of a computer and less of a tablet. And it's actually almost identical to the older Dell Inspiron Duo that launched a few years ago. This Duo 12 is powered by an Intel Core i5, i3, or i7 processor, has a 12.5-inch display at a 1080p resolution. It'll run the full version of Windows 8, and if you are familiar with the Dell Inspiron Duo, essentially it's a tablet/notebook, and the screen basically still swivel. It's the one that's in the image that they can watch. It's a swiveling display, so it can swivel and fold down, so you can have just a tablet or swivel back, and you can have a notebook with a keyboard. It'll most likely start around $1,000, considering that it has good hardware, and it's more of an Ultrabook and less of a tablet. Next up is the 127, which is a very, very interesting device, because it's essentially Dell adding touchscreen to a 27-inch all-in-one computer. It'll have a Core i5 or Core i7 processor, up to 16 gigs of RAM, a GeForce GT 640M graphics up to that, up to 2 terabytes of storage, a 27-inch display at a 2560 by 1440 resolution, and of course it'll run Windows 8. So essentially we're looking at a desktop computer in the form factor of an all-in-one computer, including all the great hardware like a desktop processor, good graphics, plenty of memory and RAM and everything like that, and a large display at a really high resolution, but with a touchscreen, which is kind of a really nice thing here. It'll most likely arrive in October, and we can expect a price point of something pretty expensive, around $2,000 plus, considering the hardware that you're getting here. The 27-inch display at that resolution itself, we're looking at something like just that would cost around, $800. So we're looking at something pretty high end here. Let's go and move on to HP. They're very similar to Dell. They make computers, many of them, and they've tried making tablets like the HP Slate and HP Touchpad, but both of those products actually ended up failing completely. The Touchpad, on the other hand, actually didn't fail completely. It failed, and then HP dropped it to $100, and everybody bought the Touchpad, and that was kind of like nothing. But the first device that HP announced is called the Envy TouchSmart Ultrabook 4, and it is kind of an interesting device because it has an Intel processor, 14-inch HD display, up to 2 GB of AMD graphics, Beats audio, and Windows 8. It's kind of an interesting mix right there because it'll have good graphics on a smaller screen, and we don't really know a whole lot about this quite yet, but I think it's going to be kind of more of a notebook and less of a tablet, so expect the pricing to be comparable to like an Ultrabook, like $1,000, maybe a little bit cheaper, maybe a little bit more, and it'll most likely arrive in October or before the end of this year, because I think most of these companies really want to get their products out before the holiday season this year. That's their goal. They will most likely make it. Next up is the HP Envy X2, which is the one that's pictured in the video which you're watching. And it, according to HP, is designed to blur the line between a notebook and a tablet, but personally it appears to be more of a device that blurs the line between a netbook and a touchscreen tablet. That's because it has some lower-end hardware like an Intel Atom processor, 32 or 64 gigs of storage, and 11.6-inch display at a 1366 by 768 resolution, along with NFC. It's kind of a lower-end device, but since it has an Atom processor, it'll run Windows 8 instead of Windows RT, which it would be if it ran on a ARM processor. Kind of interesting kind of idea. And it'll most likely cost a pretty low price point, maybe $350, similar to what we saw in netbooks were costing a few years ago when they were popular. And finally, there is the Spectra XT Touch Smart. And this is actually, I think, what the real mix between a notebook and a tablet really is. It is a large 15.6-inch device with an Intel processor, 1080p resolution, USB 3.0 and HDMI. It runs Windows 8, and it'll arrive in December according to HP, and it'll most likely cost around $1,400 because it's it will cost $1,400 starting, because that's what HP officially said. So that's one of the ones that I should know a little bit more about. Moving on to Samsung, which is a pretty big company. They're similar to Asus. They've made many computers, many tablets, many smartphones, and they've been successful in all those areas. Like, Samsung's one of the biggest companies in the world, and then one of the biggest in the consumer electronics industry as well. We didn't already know that. But Samsung used all their power to create a total of 5 new Windows 8 devices, which is quite a few. First one is the Untitled Smart PC, Intel Atom processor, 2 gigs of RAM, 128 gigabytes of storage, 11.6-inch display at a 1080p resolution, USB 2, micro HDMI, mini SD, and an interesting thing here is the S Pen support. So you know the S Pen found on the Galaxy Note or Galaxy Note 10.1. You can go ahead and use that same S Pen on this tablet. It'll offer 13.5 hours of battery life, and it'll run Windows 8. So we're looking at kind of a more low-end, mid-range sort of device, kind of like a notebook kind of, or netbook kind of form factor. 1080p display is kind of high-end, S Pen's kind of high-end, battery life is kind of high-end, Atom processor is kind of low-end, kind of a mixed device. But I expect a price point of maybe $400 to $650, and like with everything else, and probably an October release. The Untitled Smart PC Pro is more of a high-end version of the Untitled Smart PC. It'll have a Core i5 processor, 4 gigs of RAM, twice the storage at 256 gigabytes, same display, USB 3.0, micro HDMI, mini SD, and S Pen input, of course. Less battery life at only 8 hours, but we're looking at more of a high-end device that you could potentially use as your primary computer if you really, really wanted to. It'll most likely cost around $700 to $1,000, considering the hardware that you're getting. Next up is the Untitled Tab, which is essentially just like when it seems like Android tablets, like the Galaxy Note 10.1, but running Windows RT and having slightly different hardware. It'll be powered by a 1.5 GHz dual-core ARM processor. It'll have 2 gigs of RAM, 32 or 64 gigabytes of storage, a 10.1-inch display, at a 1366 by 768 resolution, USB, micro HDMI, NFC, and Bluetooth, and a large 1800 mAh battery. It'll run Windows 8, and expected to probably cost around $300 to $500, and will most likely again arrive this fall. Next up is the Samsung Series 5 Slate, which is essentially identical to the Untitled Smart PC tablets with a few different tweaks, and that same thing applies to the Series 7 Slate. The Series 5 has an Intel Atom processor, 2 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage, same 11.6-inch 1366 by 768 resolution, S Pen input, Windows 8. Series 7 has an Intel Core i5 processor, 4 gigs of RAM, 120 gigs of storage, 11.6-inch display, 1920 by 1080p resolution, which is kind of nice there, high resolution, S Pen input, and Windows 8. So both are interesting devices. And actually, Samsung announced the pricing of these devices. The Series 5 will arrive on October 26th at $750 with the keyboard dock, or $650 without it. The Series 7 will arrive on the same day, but for a little bit more at $1,199. Let's move on to Sony. They've always been an interesting company. They haven't been the most successful. They're around and they do make very great products. They just don't really take off like other companies do. They make phones and make tablets and make computers. They make pretty much anything you can think of. They make a gaming console called the PS3. But we're going to be talking about a total of 2 devices that Sony announced, the Vio Duo 11 and the Vio Tap 20. The Vio Duo 11 is essentially a high-end Ultrabook packed into a hybrid tablet form factor kind of thing. Core i3, i5, or i7 processor, 4 8 gigs of RAM, 128 or 256 gigs of storage, 11.6-inch 1080p display, Windows 8, and expect $1,000 plus. It's kind of a good sort of mix between a higher-end notebook and a tablet kind of thing here. So I really like the idea of the Duo 11. But the real favorite out of what Sony announced, and possibly one of my favorite out of all these devices, I really like, again, the Acer, I think it's the Aspire 7 or something like that. I like that device, and I also like this Tap 20, Vio Tap 20 by Sony. It's one of my favorites that I've seen so far, and it's kind of has a completely different form factor. It's a Core i3, i5, or i7 processor, 4 or 8 gigs of RAM, 750 or 1 terabyte of storage, 20-inch display at a 1600 by 900 resolution, Gigabit Ethernet, USB 3, Bluetooth, SD card, NFC, Windows 8, and it's essentially a really, really large 20-inch tablet that weighs 11 pounds, and it's really designed for more of a home tablet. You can set it in your kitchen, use it while you're cooking, something like that. You know, in your living room, that's what kind of Sony's kind of saying, and that's what they're also saying. It's a fresh new concept in home computing. I really like this whole idea of something that can also be a good home theater computer. You can set it up next in front of your TV on like a table, and you can go ahead and look up things when you're watching TV. I don't know, but kind of an interesting idea. It's definitely innovative and definitely something that we haven't seen before. Let's move on to the last of all these different devices. There's 2 of them actually. We're talking about Toshiba. They have the U920T and the U925T. They're essentially the same sort of thing. The 20T is designed for Europe, and the 25T is designed for the United States and other countries. Both have Intel Core i5 processors, 2 gigs of RAM, up to 256 gigs of storage, USB 3, HDMI, NFC, SD card slot, and they both run Windows 8. The U920T is the European model. They arrive at 949 euros, which translates to $1,200 in the United States. We don't know if the United States version will cost us that same price, but in general, we can expect more than $1,000 for the price point of these devices. So, in conclusion, Samsung is doing a lot of interesting things when it comes to all their devices, and I think they're doing something that most of these companies are going to be doing in the future. And they're essentially taking their older devices, like the Series 5 Ultra, and adding a touchscreen to them, and that's just what they're doing. They're trying to make all these computers that they have Windows 8 compatible, or at least optimized for Windows 8, and that means a touchscreen, and that's kind of what companies are doing across the board. So, that's kind of about it for this long article. In conclusion, I really like the Acer Aspire S7 and the Sony Vio Tap 20. Those are my 2 favorites. All others are pretty good as well. Those are 2 of my favorites. You can go ahead and check out the full article in the description below, and most likely it will be updated by the time you're watching this on Saturday, which is a few days into the future at the time of this recording. I'm recording Thursday. So just stay tuned for that. So now on to some more, just, I guess, simple news. Not a whole 3,000 word article, like a 500 word article or around there, but this is Amazon and their next generation Kindle Fire/Fires. So Amazon announced they're going to be holding an event on September 6th, and they'll be in Los Angeles, and it'll be held at 10:30 a.m. We have no idea what they'll be announced officially, because essentially the invitation was just blank. It said have the Amazon logo, information of where and when it's going to be happening, and that's basically it. Most likely it'll have something to do with content, given that it's going to be held in Los Angeles, and that could mean Amazon will be getting new content partners, so they could be updating existing ones. So we don't know what that can mean. They could also launch next generation Kindle Fire. So, what the next Kindle Fire most likely will be is a 7-inch device at a higher 1280 by 800 resolution, faster processor, more memory, possibly the camera, improved battery life, and overall the Kindle Fire 2 will be essentially a better tablet that will be designed to compete with the Asus Nexus 7. And also future 7-inch tablets like possibly the iPad mini. So kind of expect improved internals, design, software, something like that. So one rumor that's been happening for quite a while now is, will there be a 10-inch Kindle Fire? And I honestly think that there will be a Kindle Fire that is 10 inches, and it'll be announced at this event. Or most likely have similar hardware to the 7-inch Kindle Fire, but it'll be bigger. Maybe we have a higher resolution as well. So that's kind of what they're trying to do here. Most likely compete with iPad and other 10-inch tablets like the Galaxy Note 10.1, for example, and possibly in the future the Asus Nexus 10, whatever it's going to be called. So another rumor has been that Amazon is planning to launch a Kindle Fire phone, and honestly, it does make some sense. It mostly will be a 4-inch phone, pretty standard hardware, specifications, everything like that. But personally, I don't think it'll be announced at this event on September 6th. I think it'll be announced maybe September next year, or even later than that. I don't think it's going to be announced on September 6th. Just really doesn't make sense to launch it then. Don't really know why exactly. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense, since just kind of considering all the phones that are to come very soon. Because Motorola, HTC, all the 5 Nexus phones, there's going to be a ton of phones launching in the United States very, very shortly. And I think if they launch it now, it would get mixed up again with the iPhone 5 too. That's going to be announced right around this time too. So just all these phones launching, people might just not really even see the Kindle Fire phone. They might just completely ignore it, and that'll be the end of it. So I think they're probably going to wait. If they do launch it, I think they'll do it after CES next year. That's one of the potential things, or they could wait until mid next year or late next year. I don't really know when exactly. But our second sponsor is Amazon. If you want a tablet, whether you like Kindle, you only want to wait for the Kindle Fire 2. There's still the Kindle Fire. It's $300, good deal. You can actually get it used too for as low as $134. It's bound to go down significantly as the Kindle Fire 2 launches. So if you don't mind getting the last generation hardware at a discount, then the Kindle Fire is a good option, and we have a link in the description below, so you can get over to that Amazon page for the Kindle Fire. So our final article is covering how Apple won the Apple versus Samsung patent lawsuit. So the first week of the trial was essentially Apple explaining why Samsung infringed on their patents. And Apple showed off a lot of documentation on how Samsung was trying to beat Apple by using similar phones to the iPhone, and confuse customers in getting a Samsung phone over an iPhone, from icon design to small things like Apple's bounce back patent. That really did make a great case, and these are a lot of their design patents that they had with iPhone and iPad as well to convince judges that Samsung infringed Apple's patents. So according to Apple's patent portfolio, Samsung willfully copied Apple's products to the point that many customers couldn't really tell the difference between the two, and that 28 Samsung devices infringe Apple's patents, and that Samsung should have to pay a significant amount of money to use those patents. Samsung told the story during the second week of the month, and they have less patents, but they did make a pretty good case. Their patents were more technical and harder to explain to the judges, but Samsung really did do a good job for what they could do. They had patents that covered processes like sending an email with an image embedded, and being able to play an MP3 in the background while being able to use other smartphone functions. Samsung also added that Apple's patents might not be valid. In other words, the Apple patents that show off Apple patents for like the iPad, the square box, square tablet sort of thing, that's too vague. That's what Samsung said. And they said that Apple's iPhone 4S, 3GS, 4 iPad 2, 3G, and iPod Touch 4G all infringe on Samsung's patents. That's their conclusion, and that Apple should have to pay a good amount of money for those infringed products. In the end, Apple won the lawsuit, They had to pay Apple just a little bit over $1 billion in damages. Makes sense. Actually, there's a link in the description. There's a link to this article, and that article has a link to a list of smartphones and how much each of them cost. Samsung, like the Fascinate, cost Samsung $140,000. Epic 4G Touch, the Galaxy S2 version, was $100,000. But overall, 28 devices, all costing a good amount of money. Really, added up to over $1 billion, which is pretty big. But for for Samsung, that's not a whole lot. So that's about it for this podcast. You can come back next week. We'll be talking about more IFA 2012. Today, actually on Thursday, I'm planning to launch or publish an article covering the smartphones that were announced at IFA 2012. And I'm also doing an article later on Friday maybe, where I'm going to cover the cameras that are announced at IFA. So just stay tuned for that. And next week we'll also have more information, so just stay tuned for that. Subscribe. We also upload more videos. I have a review of the Nexus 7 coming. I keep saying that. I'm busy with other things, but it is coming in the future. I'll be reviewing other devices and unboxing other devices too, so stay tuned for all that. Check out our blog, theprime.co. I also upload another video on YouTube on Sundays, which is a Minecraft video where we're building a house in every biome. After Minecraft, we'll do other gaming topics, like we'll play other games. Don't really know how that's going to go, but stay tuned for that. And that's about it.